Alright, in the red corner, weighing in at 206 grams with a triple camera setup, we have the iPhone 14 Pro. And fighting out of the blue corner, weighing in at 196 grams with a triple camera setup of its own, we have the S23 Plus. And today, they're going to go head to head to see which is the best. Hey, what's good YouTube world? Prash here, and today we're going to do things a little differently. So I'm in a fortunate position to have both of these phones available to me, and so in this video we're going to pit the two against each other just to see what's what. So let's get straight into it. Alright, so the iPhone 14 Pro features a 48 megapixel f1.8 primary sensor with sensor shift optical image stabilization. You also get a 12 megapixel f2.8 telephoto lens with 3 times optical zoom, and lastly you get a 12 megapixel f2.2 120 degree ultra wide lens. Now the selfie cam features a 12 megapixel f1.9 23mm wide lens, and you can also shoot 4K stabilized footage at up to 60 frames per second. Now in the other corner you have the S23 Plus, and with the S23 Plus you get a 50 megapixel f1.8 primary sensor that has optical image stabilization, and on top of this you get a secondary 10 megapixel f2.4 telephoto lens with 3 times zoom. Lastly, you get a tertiary 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide lens. You also get a 12 megapixel front facing camera with autofocus. In terms of video performance, you can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second, but where it gets even crazier is the fact that you can also shoot 8K footage at up to 30 frames per second. Alright, so now we're just going to talk about the looks and the design of the camera systems of each of these phones because I am superficial like that. So let's get into it. Funnily enough, Apple, which was usually known for their sleek, understated designs, is actually the bolder of the two phones, boasting the hot plate design, with the S23 Plus packing a very minimalist set of sensors floating in space. Alright, so let's look at some common shooting scenarios and see how both of these phones perform. Okay, so one of the most common scenarios is outside during the day with lots of light, and I gotta say both of these phones take brilliant photos straight out the box without having to tweak a thing. Alright, so it's clear that both of these devices have a different approach when it comes to the computational photography involved in producing these shots. The Samsung prefers the more vibrant route, with the colors in each shot really popping out at you, and while these shots appear more colorful than that of the iPhone 14 Pro, I feel that it sort of teeters on the edge of being a little oversaturated. It also really likes to enhance the sky in most scenarios, and in some cases, it really does start to look a little artificial. Now the iPhone's approach is a little less bold, but yields a more color accurate photo, and in some cases had better detail when focusing on a subject. It even held its own in retaining a high amount of detail in areas where the subject cast a shadow over the ground. And so because the iPhone 14 Pro's HDR processing isn't as excessive as the S23 Plus, I felt that you got the more true to life shot with the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, both phones offer a 3x zoom, however the Samsung can digitally zoom in even further, although I'll be honest with you, this feature isn't exactly that useful and the photo produced isn't usable for that matter. Alright, so in terms of selfie cams, I gotta give it to Samsung on this one. The portrait mode on the S23 Plus allows for a wider shot as opposed to the iPhone 14 Pro, which isn't as wide and has a weird crop. The S23 Plus automatically applies a bokeh to your surroundings, which the iPhone 14 Pro strangely did not in portrait mode. Both phones had a similar amount of detail in each shot, with my skin tone being accurate across the board. Alright, so when it comes to nighttime photography, it's really interesting because the iPhone and the Samsung both perform great. Here the iPhone's computational photography comes through to give really detailed shots with a good balance of brightening up the image without losing detail. And this is very important, as you'll see with the Samsung. Some of these shots were taken with little direct light on subjects, and the iPhone 14 Pro performed really well. Now with the Samsung, photos definitely appear brighter, and while the bigger sensor does pick up more detail, I feel like the processing is a little heavy and makes shots seem a little washed out. Again, I feel that the iPhone offers the more realistic shots out of the two. But that's not to say that the Samsung can't hold its own when taking nighttime photos. as in a few instances such as this one, the Samsung outperformed the iPhone, which is quite interesting. Alright, so in terms of nighttime selfies, I think I'm going to have to give it to Samsung. I think overall it had the more flattering selfie portrait mode, and I think that's pretty much what people would use this for anyway. As far as close-up shots go, I had to give it to the iPhone on this one. I felt that during close-up shots, the S23 Plus wasn't able to focus in on a subject properly and seemed to hunt around a bit despite me tapping where I wanted focus, and so in this shot, the dials on the right of the camera weren't in focus as opposed to the iPhone, which was able to keep the entire camera in focus and not just the lens. The iPhone also consistently gave shots with more detail than the S23. Alright, so I think for the most part in terms of photography, both of these phones feel even. However, where the iPhone 14 Pro gets its edge over the S23 Plus is with its brilliant low light performance, which really should not be downplayed. I mean, the computational photography is absolutely brilliant, and what Apple's done here is really, really impressive, so it should not be understated there. Alright, let's talk about the S23 Plus for now. And I gotta say, when it comes to photography, the S23 Plus has a lot more features than the iPhone 14 Pro. And I gotta be completely honest, I only tried like half of these features that were actually relevant to me and my shooting needs. But they're there if you want. Alright, so let's get into video. Now when it comes to video, I will say that the iPhone 14 Pro offers better stabilization than the S23 Plus, thanks to the sensor shifting stabilizers in the main sensor. However, Samsung's digital stabilization is still excellent. Both offer great video output, especially in the 4K 30 to 60 frames per second region. Now despite this advantage, I feel that the S23 Plus still takes this category over the iPhone 14 Pro, as you can shoot up to 8K footage at 30 frames per second, and in addition, its autofocus is a tad bit faster and much smoother than the iPhone 14 Pro, which honestly feels a little clunky. Now I'll be completely honest with you, I did end up shooting 8K footage on the S23 Plus, and it was spectacular. No joke, it was really great, it was super crispy. However, I didn't feel like putting it in this video because I honestly didn't feel like nuking my timeline and just causing my computer to explode. Premiere Pro crashes enough on me as it is. But yeah, just take my word for it. The 8K recording capabilities of the S23 Plus is great, and it's there if you need it. I am looking to shoot 8K footage in the future, so I'm glad that the S23 Plus can deliver in this sense. Alright, so which of these phones is actually better overall? Well, let's review. I think when it comes to photography, in most scenarios with decent light, I think plenty of detail is retained between both these phones. I think they push out some really great shots, whether it's through the telephoto lens, the wide lens, or even just the super close-up shots. They all come out really great. I will say that the iPhone gives the more color accurate shots, with the Samsung really opting to go for the more punchy, vibrant route, where the colors seem a little bit more saturated and a little bit artificial. But this is something that I kind of like, so I think it's up to personal preference there. Now, when it comes to low light conditions, iPhone pretty much takes it. The computational photography plus the LiDAR's depth sensors really allow you to have quick autofocus in low light conditions, and you just get a better image, and the overall experience when shooting low light photos is actually just better with the iPhone than the S23 Plus. Now when it comes to video, both of these are very close, but I'm just going to have to give it to the Samsung, partly because of the slightly better autofocus, and partly due to the fact that I can shoot 8K footage if I ever robbed a bank and had enough money to buy a beast of a computer. Now if you were to offer me both, which one would I put in my pocket? Well, I gotta say, for me personally, it would have to be the S23 Plus. Mainly because I use my phone for videography over photography. For photography, I would normally just take out my actual dedicated camera for that. As far as my phone goes, it's mostly for video and shooting a lot of B-roll footage that you see here on YouTube. Now in saying that, however, I feel that if you are more photocentric, then the iPhone 14 Pro is definitely the way to go. Because I think overall, it slightly edges out the S23 Plus when it comes to taking photos. Alright, so this has been it for my take on the S23 Plus versus the iPhone 14 Pro camera test. It definitely looks like we're out of time, so I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.